Picture a gray, windswept day in October 1921. A 33-year-old bank clerk is sitting alone on the beach at Margate. He looks entirely out of place. He's exhausted, his marriage is collapsing, and his mind is fracturing under the strain of a nervous breakdown. His doctor sent him here for a simple wrist cure, a bit of sea air to settle his nerves. But instead of relaxing, he takes out a piece of paper and scribbles 3 lines that feel like a confession of total cognitive failure. On Margate sands, I can connect nothing with nothing. To any casual observer, this is the portrait of a man hitting rock bottom. It looks like pure, unadulterated despair, a mind that has lost the ability to find meaning in the world. But here is where the story takes a strange turn. If you look at this exact moment of collapse through the lens of ancient Hermetic philosophy, the picture shifts dramatically. What looks like a mental dead end is actually a precise, technical description of a necessary spiritual stage. He wasn't just falling apart, he was entering the Nigredo, the dark, chaotic dissolution that alchemists believed was the only path to true transformation.
And what's just so fascinating there is that we can take this intensely personal, seemingly unique crisis, this moment where T.S. Eliot felt this absolute cognitive failure, and we can reread it.
Reread it how?
Not just as biography, not just as a sad story about a struggling artist, but as a technical report, a perfectly executed report from the heart of process that mystics and philosophers had been mapping out for thousands of years.
So you're saying it almost suggests he was, bizarrely, exactly where he needed to be.
He was. It wasn't a wrong turn. It was the beginning of the path.
And that really is the core of this deep dive. Our mission here is to take that moment, Eliot's crisis at Margate, and really explore how this ancient alchemical framework shaped his modernist masterpiece, The Wasteland.
And I think to ask a bigger question, can this old map, this kind of spiritual chemistry, actually help you or me navigate the kind of intense pressure and disconnection that feels so common in contemporary life?
Right. Does it still have utility? So let's unpack this. If we're going to use this alchemical map, we have to start at the very beginning, at its foundation. And that's Hermetic philosophy. For someone who hasn't really delved into, esoteric history, where did these ideas even come from? And why on earth do they become relevant to a 20th century poet grappling with modernity?
Well, Hermeticism is essentially the bedrock of all Western esoteric thought. It's the source code, in a way. It gets its name from a mythical figure, Hermes Trismegistus.
Which means what? Hermes the thrice great.
Exactly, thrice great. And he was seen as this blend, this syncretic figure combining the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god of wisdom, Thoth. The texts that were attributed to him, especially the Corpus Hermeticum, were sort of lost to the West for a time and then rediscovered during the Renaissance.
I mean, they had a huge impact.
A profound impact. You have thinkers from Isaac Newton to Giordano Bruno being deeply influenced by these texts.
So we're not talking about some kind of fringe magic here. This was a serious intellectual current.
Absolutely. The whole point of these texts was theological, it was cosmological, philosophical. They offered this vision of the universe as a single, unified, living organism. And the core principle, the thing that makes it relevant to Eliot, or to us, is the principle of correspondence.
As above, so below.
That's the one.
We hear that phrase everywhere. It's almost become a cliche. But what does it practically mean in this context?
It means that the macrocosm, so the cosmic order, nature, the entire universe, is structured in the exact same way as the microcosm.
The individual human.
The individual human life, your mind, your body. They're built on the same blueprints, and they reflect each other constantly.
Can you give us a concrete example of that? Because I think for the modern mind, we tend to put a hard wall between the external world and our internal state.
Sure. Think about it ecologically. If there's a huge ecological breakdown happening in the world, Hermetic philosophy would say that this is inevitably mirrored by a psychological and spiritual collapse in the people living in that system.
So the outer chaos reflects the inner chaos.
And vice versa. Your personal psychological structure is a mirror of the cosmos. For example, all the natural cycles, the seasons, the movement of the planets, birth, death, renewal, all of this has to be mirrored precisely in our own lives. We have periods of growth, periods of crisis, aging, rebirth.
I've heard that in the medieval view, if a king was unjust, it was believed the crops would fail.
Yes, that's a perfect example. The moral order of the ruler, the microcosm, corresponds directly to the fertility of land, the macrocosm.
So if we take that idea and apply it to Eliot, here he is sitting on a collapsing shoreline in a post-World War I Europe that is just structurally and morally shattered. His personal breakdown isn't just personal.
No, it's simply him fulfilling the principle of correspondence. His interior world is a perfect reflection of the fragmented exterior world.
And this leads us straight to alchemy.
It does. Alchemy was the practical application of this principle. It was about using the transformation of matter, of physical stuff, as an external symbol for the transformation of consciousness.
Right. We always get stuck on the idea of turning lead into physical gold, but that was just the surface level. The real project, the spiritual one, was transforming the base metal of our ordinary consciousness into the gold of enlightenment.
That was the great work. It was everything. All the physical processes you read about, the mixing, the heating, grinding things up in the retort, all of it was a metaphor for the intense internal work you have to do to transform the ego.
To take our messy, base human existence and turn it into something more unified.
Into an illuminated awareness, or what modern psychology might call a fully integrated self.
And that great work, it's not just a vague idea. It's structured. It has clear, observable phases. Let's start with the one that gives our deep dive its name, the Nigredo.
The Nigredo, or the blackening. This is the first and, frankly, the most terrifying stage. It's all about dissolution, decay, putrefaction. It's chaos.
What does that mean in practice?
Physically, in the lab, you're taking all your fixed ingredients in the glass vessel, the retort, and you are reducing them back to their undifferentiated primordial state. They called it the prima materia.
The first matter.
Yes. You are deliberately, methodically destroying the old form. This is why it's associated with blackness, with darkness, with rot.
It honestly sounds like a death.
It is a death.
Yeah.
It's the death of the previous form, the previous self. Psychologically, this is the dark night of the soul. It's a period of intense melancholy, of internal conflict, of confronting the absolute darkest parts of yourself. What Jung would later call the shadow.
You're losing your anchor.
Completely.
Yeah.
And if you can get through that, if you can navigate that total dissolution, what comes next?
The albedo, the whitening.
Right. This is a stage of purification, of intense withdrawal and reflection. Once the matter has been thoroughly blackened and decomposed, you cleanse it, you wash it, you distill it, the soul begins to emerge again, but it's purified. It leads to a heightened but almost sterile spiritual awareness.
The impurities are gone, but it's not the final step.
No, the final integration hasn't happened yet. That sets the stage for the culmination.
The rubedo.
The reddening. This is the synthesis. The ultimate ripening and realization. This is where the purified material from the albedo is reunited with life. It achieves permanence. The identity is reconstructed. The goal, the philosopher's stone, the integrated self is finally achieved.
But the key here, and I want to emphasize this, is that you cannot get to the whitening or the reddening without the blackness.
It is a non-negotiable first step. There is no shortcut around the Nigredo.
So let's go back to Margate with this lens. Eliot's 3 lines, I can connect nothing with nothing. On the surface, it's just pure despair. But you're saying it's a precise technical report on the Nigredo. How?
Well, the philosophical implication of that phrase is just stunningly accurate. If the entire Hermetic universe is built on the idea that everything connects to everything else.
The principle of correspondence.
Exactly. If there's this fundamental unity, then to say I can connect nothing with nothing is a confession that the entire web of meaning, the whole philosophical and psychological structure holding your world together, has just shattered.
He's describing the reduction of his consciousness back to that prima materia.
Yes. His mind has become the psychological first matter. He wasn't just being poetic about his feelings. He was giving a technical detail of the breakdown of his entire cognitive operating system.
And you can see the precursors, right? The things that led him to that moment in 1921.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the psychological pressures. His marriage to Vivienne was a psychological war zone. Constant illness, hysteria on both sides. He was trapped in this mundane, soul-crushing job as a bank clerk at Lloyd's, which was completely suppressing his artistic self.
So every fixed identity he had, husband, respectable professional, even budding poet, it was all dissolving at the same time.
The internal and external pressures created the perfect alchemical environment for the blackening to occur. The descent was, at that point, totally unavoidable.
It was necessary.
It was. And this descent has a name in mythology. It's called catabasis, the journey into the underworld, into darkness. The alchemists were convinced that this dissolution was the only functional path to real transformation. They even had a mnemonic for it, which is so central to their belief. Vitriol.
That's an acronym, right? What does it stand for?
It is. It's from Latin. Visita interiora terrae rectificando in vanis occultum lapidem.
Visit the interior of the earth, and by rectification you will find the hidden stone.
The instruction is completely explicit. You must descend into the interior darkness, into the chaos, the place of decomposition, and only there, through rigorous refinement rectification, will you find the real prize, the hidden stone, the enlightened self.
So Eliot collapsing on that beach wasn't failing. He was fulfilling the exact technical requirement of that descent. What I find so fascinating about this is that this profound internal spiritual work, it wasn't happening in some controlled Hermetic laboratory. It was happening on a public beach. Why is the geography of Margate shoreline so critical to this whole process?
Well, transformation rarely happens in the middle of a perfectly structured, ordered space. It doesn't happen in your comfortable living room. It happens at the edges, on the threshold. And that's the concept of liminality.
Liminal spaces.
The gaps.
Exactly. The thresholds where one fixed state meets another, and in that meeting, both become unstable.
And a beach is the ultimate unstable ground.
It's the definition of an interzone, isn't it? Margate Sands is neither fully land nor fully sea. It's not solid, it's not liquid. The ground itself is unstable, it shifts with every single tide, and huge parts of it just vanish twice a day.
So for Eliot, who was mentally fragmented himself, he was neither the person he used to be, the bank clerk, nor the person he might become, the great poet. This environment was a perfect mirror.
It was a physical manifestation of his internal state. By literally standing on the physical edge of civilization, he was forced to process the edge of his own sanity.
The environment wasn't a comfort, it was a catalyst. It was. His doctor sent him there for a rest cure, hoping for some kind of passive recovery. But instead, the inherent instability of the location just accelerated his internal chaos. The beach forced him into an active confrontation with his own dissolution.
And what about the sea itself? In alchemy, water has a huge role that goes way beyond just geography.
The sea, or water in general, is always associated with the alchemical principle of mercury. And we're not talking about the planet.
The principle.
The principle of mercury is the universal solvent. It is the force that breaks down all fixed forms. It dissolves the hardest materials and reduces everything back to a fluid, flowing state. It is the great unfixer.
And mythologically, Mercury has a dual role here, doesn't it?
Yes, spiritually, Mercury is the psychopomp.
The guide of souls.
Guide of souls. The mythological figure who mediates between the fixed world of the living and the chaotic, fluid world of the dead, or the underworld. So when Eliot stood by the sea, he wasn't just near a large body of water. He was in the presence of the agent of dissolution and the necessary guide for his soul's descent.
So there was no escape. The beach offered no distractions.
None. Only this vast, dissolving instability. It forced him to just sit with what was breaking inside him.
The seaside cottage, which was supposed to be a place of healing, actually became a crucible. The collapse was intensified by the very thing meant to cure it.
It became a laboratory for his inner blackening. And this idea, of seeking breakthroughs at the edge of civilization, it's so deep-seated in our cultural traditions. You think of anchorites going to the desert, or mystics to mountain caves.
Or prophets seeking answers by the water's edge.
It's a deep, recurring pattern. Eliot's retreat to the water fits perfectly. The mythic descent, the catabasis into the substrate, into the underworld, it's a functional prerequisite for any kind of emergence.
And so that experience of total collapse, of finding nothing to connect with nothing, that became the raw material. The dissolution on the beach literally transformed his breakdown into the prima materia that he then used to build the most important poem of the 20th century. Okay, so if Margate was the necessary chemical bath where the self dissolved, then the poem itself, the wasteland, has to be the literary retort. The vessel where this chaotic prima materia gets subjected to all this intellectual heat and pressure. How does the poem's structure actually mirror the Nigredo?
The form of the poem is, I think, the purest expression of the blackening stage you could imagine. It's fundamentally an anthology of fragmentation.
If it just pieces.
Disconnected voices, rapid shifts in landscape and language and illusions. There's a total lack of what you might call cohesive narrative tissue. It's a collage. The technical term is parataxis, where you just place these saturated bits of information next to each other without any grammatical bridges or clear links.
That structural fragmentation is the literary equivalent of dissolution. It mimics the mind that can't connect anything.
Precisely. It's the sound of the world falling apart. And some critics have called this the necropolis of language.
A city of the dead.
A city for dead references. I mean, think about all the literary allusions he uses. Dante, Shakespeare, ancient Hindu texts, they're all just piled up, they're fragmented, they seem dead, decomposing. But just like compost, this decaying matter, the literary excrement in the retort, becomes incredibly nutrient-rich.
So the poem becomes this kind of word matrix where all these dead voices and broken references become the fertile ground for new meaning to grow. It's like a form of chemical recycling for literature.
That's the alchemical process applied directly to a text. The physical decomposition of the old world, the war, the collapse of Victorian certainty, and the old literary forms, they provide the rich prima materia you need to birth a new modernist meaning.
And if the poem is so fragmented, then the meaning isn't just something you receive. It has to be actively created by the person reading it.
Yes.
It forces the reader into the role of the alchemist. You have to be the one to separate and recombine all these broken elements.
You have to perform the work. Eliot doesn't just hand you the gold. He hands you the chaotic raw materials. You're forced to take this discontinuous, fragmented stuff and recombine it into some form of comprehension. You are separating and rarefying the bits into what you could call luminous gold, that sudden unifying flash of insight.
And if you don't do that alchemical work as the reader,
The poem just remains chaos. It remains a wasteland.
this tension, it leads right into what some people call the poetics of liminality in the poem's form. It's always occupying that threshold where two contradictory things clash without ever really merging.
That's where all the power is.
Yeah.
The categories we rely on to make sense of the world important versus trivial, high culture versus low culture, the sacred versus the profane, all of it just loses its meaning.
Right. Think about the clash between this profound despair over civilizational decay and then the really trivial, often vulgar language he uses to describe sex or daily routines.
The famous nerves dialogue in part 2, A Game of Chess, is the absolute perfect demonstration of this collision. It layers all this contemporary philosophy, Freud and Spengler, into this deeply uncomfortable liminal space.
Let's break that down. The scene is in this opulent, richly decorated room. The woman is frantic. The man is completely withdrawn.
It's a masterful study in modern neurosis. And you can read the female partner through a Freudian lens as exhibiting classic hysteria. She is desperately seeking external action, external routine. She keeps asking, what shall I do now? What shall I do? She can't tolerate the internal voice.
She needs external validation, external order to feel real.
It's what Freud called the flight into neurotic illness. She's trying to assert her will on a crumbling external reality.
And the male partner is the complete opposite. He's the narcissistic man, retreating inward for satisfaction.
He's attempting this delusional displacement of reality. Instead of engaging with the immediate, messy crisis of their relationship, he sublimates everything into fantasy. He recalls high art, specifically Shakespeare's The Tempest.
He asks her, do you know nothing? Do you see nothing? Do you remember nothing? And then he starts musing on Ariel's song.
Those are pearls that were his eyes. And that line right there is the embedded alchemical signpost.
Ah, okay. How so?
The line itself describes a miraculous transformation. It's the Nigredo of dead, decaying eyes being transformed into the albedo of precious, luminous gems pearls. He is seeking alchemical transcendence inside his own head, while she is trapped in the everyday Nigredo of their collapsing relationship.
And hanging over this very personal neurosis is the macrocosmic shadow of Oswald Spengler's philosophy.
Right. The decline of the West was huge at the time, and it basically predicted the inevitable collapse of Western civilization. He describes the world city as this landscape of decadence, populated by what he calls the parasitical city dweller, clever, traditionless, and sterile.
So the scene forces us to see that this couple's personal failure, their psychological and sexual failure, it's not just their own fault, it's a symptom of a much larger disease.
It reflects the decay of the entire civilized structure they inhabit. Everything they touch becomes inert, just like the dry, anti-metaphysical landscape of the wasteland itself. The poem forces all these disparate things: Freudian neurosis, Spenglerian civilizational collapse, Shakespearean and alchemical transcendence, to just collide without ever merging.
And you see that same collision in the way he describes sexual encounters, forcing the high and the low together.
Oh, absolutely. Think of the Thames Daughter's Lament in part 3. She's describing a genuinely tragic, pathetic experience of what seems to be rape, but Eliot frames it with this almost ridiculously vulgar, simple language. I raise my knees supine on the floor of a narrow canoe.
The profound human tragedy is expressed with language that almost undermines its own seriousness.
It's the poetics of collision, forcing a sacred feeling and a profane reality into the exact same frame.
This inherent instability, this lack of a fixed meaning, that ties directly into the idea of collaboration, doesn't it? The death of the author and the idea that the interpreter is central.
It does. When meaning is fragmented, the responsibility for creating it shifts from the creator to the audience. This is a very semiotic approach. The text itself is just a field of potential. It's what a physicist might call a wave function, a matrix of possible states.
And it only collapses into one solid interpretation when the reader engages with it.
The mind interacting with the text becomes like a quantum system interacting with a quantum reality. The poem demands that collaboration, and Eliot makes it explicit, doesn't he? He addresses the reader directly. You, hypocrite lecteur, mon semblable en frère.
You hypocrite reader, my likeness, my brother. He forces a shared complicity.
Creator and audience are one in the experience of the work. We're all implicated in the fallibility and the shared hypocrisy of the human condition.
And the ultimate figure who embodies all of this liminality is Tiresias. He's the one who connects all the fractured consciousnesses in the poem.
Tiresias is the ultimate liminal figure. He's the medium through whom all the chaos flows. He's neither sighted nor blind, having lost his sight but gained foresight. He's neither woman nor man, having experienced life in both forms. He's neither ancient nor modern.
He's described as throbbing between two lives.
He foresees, he participates in, and he embodies the poem's constant state of flux. He is the observer who has already gone through his own Nigredo and has emerged as this integrated, if tragic, consciousness.
Okay, so after all of this dissolution, Margate, the fragmentation, the drowning of the sailor Phlebas in part 4, where the body itself is dissolved by the sea, how does the poem finally exit the Nigredo? What happens in part 5? What the thunder said? Does it offer an Albedo or a Rubedo?
It offers the possibility of emerging. The transition from the sea, from dissolution to the dry desert landscape of part 5 is critical. After that ultimate loss, new tentative connections start to emerge. The poem isn't just listing ruins anymore, it's actively seeking instruction.
And the thunder speaks. It speaks in unity, but the listeners hear difference.
That's the key. The thunder speaks the great monosyllable, dat, identically 3 times. But the listeners, based on their own limited perspectives and their own desperate needs, they interpret it as 3 separate principles. Data, kayadvam, damyata.
Give, sympathize, control. But are these answers? Or are they just new suggestions for how to build a foundation?
They're not definitive answers, they're principles to attempt. They represent the barest bones of a new ethical structure. It's a purification, an albedo, built on the ashes of the old world. And the poem ends with that cluster of fragmented literary allusions shored against the ruins, culminating with the Sanskrit phrase,
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
the peace that passes understanding.
Which sounds like a very decisive Rubedo, a final reddening. But given everything that comes before it, all the pessimism, is that peace really earned, or is it just something that's hoped for?
And that is the central, ongoing, critical debate about the poem. It does not offer a neat, tidy resolution. It offers a highly qualified, tentative peace. But I think that's the nature of transformation itself. The transformation isn't achieved by reversing the collapse or finding a perfect answer. It's achieved by passing through the chaos.
So the descent into the chaos, the babble of tongues, becomes functionally indistinguishable from the ascent into unity, the Sanskrit piece.
Yes. The final message is that the blackening was absolutely essential to achieving even that passing peace. He didn't connect everything back together, but he found the capacity to stop demanding that those connections be made.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for this deep dive. What utility does this ancient map have for us today? If Eliot's breakdown in 1921 was a technical Nigredo, how did that framework eventually migrate into modern psychology?
Well, it was Carl Jung, of course. He was the one who systematically mapped the stages of alchemical transmutation onto the psychotherapeutic process. Jung saw alchemy not as some silly pseudoscience, but as the unconscious projection of what he called the individuation process.
The psychological journey toward wholeness.
Exactly. He's the one who gave the Nigredo its profound modern psychological utility.
So in psychological terms, how did Jung define the Nigredo?
For Jung, it is the dark night of the soul. It's that moment when an individual is forced to confront their own shadow. It is the intense confrontational process of facing your undesirable, repressed qualities, your internal conflicts, your deepest misconceptions about yourself.
It's the stage where the old ego identity is broken down.
It's dissolved, it's burned away to make room for a new, more integrated personality to emerge. It feels like absolute despair, but it's a necessary detoxification.
If we accept that we're all constantly entering and exiting these mini crises, these mini blackenings throughout our lives, what is Jung's 4-stage process for moving through them? Let's try to map a contemporary personal crisis onto this framework, starting with that first stage that aligns with the Nigredo.
The process begins with confession. This is the psychological analog to the Nigredo stage itself. Crisis so often begins because the person is alienated from reality, from their community, or from themselves,
Yeah.
usually by keeping secrets or maintaining a rigid, false facade.
And that facade needs to crack.
The confession is the means, back to what he called participatory engagement.
Yeah.
It's about bringing the internal demons out of the shadows and into the light of day. This is the essential distress, the wound, the stone in the shoe, that finally calls for rehabilitation.
It's not just saying I messed up. It's recognizing that the old structure of yourself is toxic and has to be dissolved.
It's the necessary blackening that demands humility.
Okay, so once that facade has collapsed and the chaos is recognized, we move to the second stage, elucidation or interpretation. This is the albedo, the whitening.
Yes, this is the coming to consciousness. Once the material has been dissolved, once it's been confessed, you can actually start to examine it. And this stage requires facing, as Jung put it, something quite ugly.
Recognizing patterns of self-sabotage, projection.
Your own destructive capacities. It involves shifting your perspective away from a narcissistic, ego-centered view, I am the victim, towards a more meaningful engagement with objective reality. This is the pattern I keep creating. It's the painful realization of how you contributed to your own personal wasteland.
That really does sound like purification, washing the old matter clean. And the third stage, which aligns with the citrinitas or the yellowing stage in alchemy, is education. This sounds like the hardest one.
It often is, because this is where your narcissistic defenses finally break down, and often they break down forcibly. Education means you are taught, sometimes very painfully, by the reality principle. It's not enough to confess or to interpret your patterns. You have to face the inevitable consequences of the wound and your past actions.
You're integrating that purified understanding into functional reality.
You learn that your actions have consequences that you can't bypass or immediately fix. It is hard-won emotional maturity.
It's the moment where the albedo, the clarity, turns yellow, the color of intellect and dawning light before it can become red.
It's the difficult process of applying that clarity to a very messy reality. You finally accept your own fallibility and the limits of the external world.
Which brings us to the final stage, transformation, the analog for the Rubedo.
This is the synthesis of all the previous steps. The identity is reconstructed. The ego moves beyond just reacting to the wound and starts to serve what Jung called the self-archetype, a purpose that is larger than the ego itself.
And this reconstruction, it's not about reversing the loss.
No, it's about integrating the lessons of the blackening and finding a new, necessary humility and purpose. The self becomes integrated, whole, and capable of functioning in the world again, but in a new way.
So if that is the ancient map for healing, here's the contemporary challenge that I think Eliot's breakdown really highlights. Our modern culture seems to be designed to prevent us from ever fully entering the Nigredo. We are constantly seeking ways to bypass the blackening entirely.
Absolutely. We treat dissolution as a crisis of brain chemistry that needs to be corrected instantly, rather than as a necessary developmental process to be lived through. We medicate it, we distract ourselves from it with consumerism, entertainment, endless scrolling.
We're terrified of that feeling of being unable to connect nothing with nothing, so we cling desperately to any superficial connection we can find.
We want the Rubedo. We want the wholeness, the happiness, the gold. But we want it without the Nigredo, without the deep internal chaos and the honest, painful confrontation.
And Hermetic wisdom and Eliot's own experience both seem to teach us that you must sit in that dissolving void. The old structures have to break entirely.
You have to visit the interior of the earth. The blackening is not a malfunction, it's the prerequisite. It is the creative material.
So Eliot's crisis, just scribbled on a piece of paper on Margate sands, it ends up providing us with this profound map. The great transformation, whether it's spiritual, creative, or psychological, it cannot offer you gold without first demanding the blackening. The breakdown on the beach became the raw material for transformation.
It proves that the edge of civilization and the edge of sanity are so often the very thresholds where the possibility of radical rebirth flickers into existence. That moment of absolute failure for him, his inability to connect, was in fact the moment of ultimate preparation. He was finally ready to begin the work.